Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Tales of Home, we retell those moments honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. My name is Miriam Halstead, and I am 67 years old. I live in Dayton, Ohio, in a narrow brick house with green shutters that stick in winter. I bought it the summer my daughter learned to ride a bike, looping clumsy circles in the alley until dust took the street. By the kitchen window, a kettle hissed and stilled. Peppermint rose from a chipped mug. When my phone buzzed, I wiped my hands on a towel that still smelled faintly of lemon oil, glanced at the screen, and pressed play. At first, there was only road noise, a low tire, hum, a turn signal patiently ticking. Then Lila's voice slid into the room, low, clipped, careful, the way she speaks when she's bracing for someone to agree with something unkind. "Evan, I can't live with her hovering anymore," she said. "She's everywhere, opening cupboards, questioning every choice. This will never feel like our place while she's here." The blinker clicked twice. "I called a residence on the north side. They have a room. If we sign this week, it's $970 a month. They'll write that she needs oversight." I felt the counter under my palm as if the laminate had turned to water. The same girl who once fell asleep on my shoulder during summer thunderstorms was cost-comparing my days like cable packages. My mouth went dry. The audio carried on Lila's breath near the phone, a soft exhale, paper rustling. "Marcus says the deed's simple," she added. "It's in her name, but we can attach guardianship language and file it along with the update. She misplaces things. She won't notice. We'll just handle it." Evan's voice came from farther back, that brisk tone he saves for decisions that make him feel efficient. "With the house, we clear the cards and finally fix that kitchen. We can start before Thanksgiving if it goes smoothly. My house, my kitchen. Every jar of coins counted at a dining room table nicked by hot pans. Every extra shift that left bleach raw in my knuckles. The idea of it flattened into quartz countertops. I replayed the message, then I played it again. Each time it ran another small knot. Unraveled knots I had tied to keep faith with the person I believed my daughter to be. On the third listen, I leaned my hip against the stove and watched the peppermint oil drift across the mug like a thin silver veil. The room around me refused to move. Memory filled the stillness. Not as a montage, not as a pleading case, but as a ledger. I never kept one that keeps itself whether you wish it to or not. I saw the winter they shut down Riverside Textiles, and I took nights mopping hospital corridors at Good Samaritan because the day shift wanted younger backs. I saw the blue jar where I slid bills one at a time. Lila's books written on a masking tape label in my tidy print. I saw a shoebox full of pay stubs, a pawn ticket with my mother's wedding pin listed as 14K brooch worn. I saw a Tuesday evening when Lila was 5 and had a fever. We rode the bus because the clinic was free but far. She slept with her face in my coat, and every stop jolted the both of us. When Lila turned 15, she wanted a proper dance-long dress, rented hall music loud enough to bounce off the rafters. I was saving for a roof patch that year. The seam near the chimney had started to let snow melt whisper down. I worked 6 months straight, added breakfast shifts at a diner on Wilmington Pike, taking orders for eggs over easy until I knew which men would ask for extra hot sauce and which ones would sneak sugar packets into their pockets. I ironed a secondhand dress until the satin-lay calm-bought shoes that wouldn't blister stood in the back of the hall while she turned under lights. "I'll give it back 1,000 times, Mom," she said, hugging me hard enough to make the bobby pins shift. People promise things. Promises shine then dull. College bills came in envelopes with barcodes and stern fonts. Miami Valley College wanted more in one semester than a year at the mill had ever paid me. The numbers were stark and impolite. I sold the Singer machine that had hemmed uniforms for a decade and took a small loan against the house signing with a pen that trembled just once and then steadied. Lila got new textbooks when she needed them. I told her oatmeal tasted better for dinner because it was simple. She walked across a stage in a cap that slid sideways, and I clapped until my palms stung. She pressed her forehead to mine and said, "This is ours. You won't clean floors again." For a while there were Sunday dinners, pot roasts that fell apart with a spoon, bowls of green beans slicked with butter. Lila bringing sunflowers from a farmer's market and saying, "This table will always be full." Then Evan lost his accounting job. Temporary Lila said, on the phone, in a voice that brokered no questions, "Can you spot us the rent I sent $1,200 without counting?" Later, it was a car payment, then the credit cards. Each time I told myself this is what mothers do, and each time something inside me whispered, "How much can you bleed and still stand?" 3 months later, Lila said moving in just until we're steady would save everyone's stress. I pictured evenings with a second coat swinging on the hall tree breakfast with more mugs on the rack. I changed the sheets in the small guest room and found a spare lamp for the nightstand. The first night told me more than I wanted to know. Evan stood in the living room and announced that the TV was too old, the Wi-Fi too slow, the refrigerator past its prime. Lila laughed in that careful way that's meant to sound light. "We'll get everything up to date." She began shifting the kitchen as if she were moving through a diagram, sugar here, flour there, spices, alphabetized my mother's tea set, wrapped and boxed and labeled donate in a tidy block letter I didn't recognize as hers. My photographs, Lila missing 2 front teeth the first day of kindergarten with bangs crooked from a bowl cut. I ruined migrated from the hallway to a cardboard sleeve and then silently to the attic. At night, voices lowered when I came into the kitchen. We were talking about groceries. Lila would chirp too quickly, too bright. Evan sat in my father's old chair as if he had purchased it with cash. Small things disappeared: the grocery list from the counter, the sticky note with the plumber's number, a $2 bill I kept tucked in a cookbook because my grandmother had insisted it was good luck. If I asked, Lila frowned and touched my arm with that faux concern gesture people perform when there's an audience. "Mom, you've been so forgetful. Let me organize your bills." "You don't need the stress." A week later, a man in a white coat visited. "Geriatric consults are standard after 65, Lila said, smiling as if she were introducing a song at a recital. The man knocked on my door jamb without quite asking permission and took notes while I spelled my name and named the month. He smelled faintly of cigarettes masked by mint gum. 2 days after that, a woman with a clipboard came from social services, her tone pitched at the soft end of the scale. "We've had a report of some confusion," she said. The words sat in the air between us, like a moth that might be a bat. I poured her water and kept my voice calm. When she left, Lila hugged me longer than she ever had and stage whispered to Evan, "I'm so worried. Yesterday she made coffee at midnight thinking it was morning. I hadn't." But I watched my friend's eyes soften when Lila told the story later, and I understood what Lila was building. A case brick by brick in a court without a judge, where the only evidence that matters is what people are prepared to believe. On a rainy Thursday, I baked a pineapple upside-down cake because Evan once said he liked it, and I am a person who still offers sweetness even while I am trying not to wince. When I carried it into the kitchen, Lila sat with her cousin Marcus Ellery, papers spread on the table like a game paused mid-hand. The moment I stepped through the doorway, Marcus snapped them into a folder. "Surprise, Mom," Lila sang, smiling without showing teeth. "Insurance forms for Evan." In the second before the folder closed, I saw my name printed in bold on a line where names should not be. "Why is my name on your paperwork?" I asked. They looked at one another, a glance so fast it hardly existed. "Routine," Lila said smoothly. "Beneficiaries, we want to make sure you're safe. Safe is a generous word that can also mean contained." I nodded, and the nod tasted like tin. The air in my house changed after that, as if someone had replaced it with a thinner version and my lungs hadn't been notified. Conversation stopped when I crossed a threshold. Notes appeared on the refrigerator in Lila's neat hand call, "Dr. Ames don't forget meds trash day," as if the house itself now needed instructions to remain upright. Evan tutted over bank statements and set them in tidy stacks. "Why so much cash?" he asked, tapping a line with a knuckle. 200 withdrew last week." "For groceries," I said, and looked at the pantry shelf labeled grains, as if it had an answer. The call came the next afternoon after the cake had been eaten and the papers filed somewhere I could not see. It was the voicemail I replayed until silence became an object I could pick up and set down. Lila's voice was a clean blade, a care home with a rate sheet, guardianship language, filing things while I looked away, Evan talking kitchens as if home were a showroom that had accidentally contained me. And Marcus, my sister's boy, who once helped me rake leaves for $5 in cocoa, now a clerk who had learned how to make signatures do small tricks. Grief arrives first. Not the operatic kind that wails, it's hotter than that and quieter. It stung behind my eyes and sat in my throat until swallowing hurt. Then a second feeling came solid and cool like river stone. I stood very still and listened to my own breath. In the living room, the ceiling fan thumped faintly as if a bird were nesting in the rafters. Someone, Lila, I think, had set a citronella candle on the mantel. It had tunneled because no one had trimmed the wick. I walked down the hallway and placed my hand on the doorframe where pencil lines mark Lila's heights. 6'8", a tall spurt at 13. We used a ruler and made sure the lines were straight. I left the pencil on the molding, a habit from years of measuring. The graphite had smudged over time, soft as ash. In the bedroom, the cedar chest waited at the foot of the bed. It holds the bones of a life. A birth certificate folded into a square softer than paper should allow the release of mortgage with a notary stamp that winks when the light hits it. The insurance binder with my name spelled without error. A coil-bound ledger with a red ribbon where I tucked numbers. Nothing complicated, just dates and notes that keep your mind from turning stories into fog. I set them on the quilt in a neat row and breathed until my hands steadied. The peppermint in my mouth had gone bitter. I took off my work cardigan, the one with the mended elbow, and hung it on the knob of the wardrobe. On the inside of the door, a mirror warps you slightly at the edges. People get used to their distortions. I met my eyes in that glass. The pupils didn't swim. The lines around my mouth belonged to laughter and concentration in equal measure. From the back of the wardrobe, I pulled a dress I hadn't worn since Lila's graduation. A deep garnet sheath with a jacket that makes my shoulders sit correctly. I draped it over the chair as if it had asked to rest there. On the dresser, a small dish held pearl studs that once belonged to my mother. I touched them with the tip of one finger and felt the cool. I wrote a short note and tucked it under a magnet on the refrigerator shaped like a strawberry. Out for errands. Back later. M. I placed the phone on the table and slid my thumb along the edge, feeling where the case had chipped when it fell last spring. The house sounded empty, though I knew Lila and Evan were only 2 rooms away counting something. In the quiet, I stepped back through the past. One more time, not to wallow, not to plead my case to the invisible judge that presides over the things we tell ourselves, but to make sure I hadn't imagined entire decades. I remembered the summer I worked landscaping with a Sunday school friend's company because they needed someone not afraid of heat. I spread mulch until my forearms were nicked with small cuts and smelled of pine sap for days. The check went to tuition deposit fall, and Lila never saw me clean sap from under my nails with a butter knife. There was a December when pipes burst 2 houses down, and I learned to shut off my water from a neighbor at midnight by the light of a phone. I remembered choosing paint samples when we could finally afford to repaint the kitchen the moment we decided on a shade named Soft Wheat that looked different in morning and evening. Small, ordinary braveries. A life is mostly made from those. I am not a dramatic person. My neighbors know me as the woman who brings soups when people have surgery, who trims the hedges on the sidewalk side so strollers can pass, who pays cash because it is easier to see it go. But I am not a child, and I am not confused. Words mean things. Paper means things. A house is a house, yes, but it is also the map of how you got here. Out front, the maple leaves had begun to crisp at the edges, a tired brown hiding under green. A neighbor's wind chime hit a single note and held it as if waiting for a reply. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then remembered its job poorly and stopped. I stood at the sink and drank a glass of water with both hands. It tasted faintly of copper, the way water does when the city fleshes the lines. In the afternoon, Helen from church stopped by with a jar of peaches she'd put up last summer. "You look tired, Miriam," she said kindly, and I heard Lila answer for me from the doorway. "She's been having little lapses. We're keeping an eye." She said it like pride. Helen touched my sleeve. I saw pity enter her eyes and take a seat. The falsest thing about pity is that it often feels like care to the person who gives it. After she left, Lila gathered envelopes on the table, my mail mixed in with hers. "I'll sort these," she said. "No need for you to worry about statements." She slid my bank envelope under a magazine and kept her hand on it. "Mom." "Why do you take out cash?" she asked lightly. "You've never been great at receipts." The room had cooled. A breeze found a draft under the back door and discovered my ankles. "I buy what I need," I said. "I like knowing what's left." She smiled with all her teeth, "Of course. There is a particular sadness in watching someone rehearse lines you didn't cast them to speak. There is also a peculiar relief when rehearsal reveals what the performance will be. It means the surprise has finished with you. It means what remains is choice." That night, the house settled with its usual creaks. Evan watched a renovation show loudly enough that the voiceover bled through the wall. "Paint it white? Knock down this open, that open everything." Lila called down the hallway. "Mom, you took your pill, right?" "I do not take a pill at night," but I said nothing. I lay very still and counted backwards from 50, then forward to 60, then paused and listened to my heart do its patient work. When the clock on the stove showed 5:42 the next morning, the sky had the color of paper before ink. I opened the back door and stood on the top step in my robe. The alley smelled damp and metallic from last night's rain. Somewhere 2 blocks over, a train gave a low, reluctant horn as it crossed Wilmington. I closed my eyes and let the air push against my throat and fill it. It felt like breathing after you've been holding your head above water too long. Inside, I straightened the papers on my bed without reading them again. I slid each into a zip pouch, the kind with a red slider you can hear click if you move it left to right deliberately. I tucked the pouch into the bottom of my bag and set the garnet jacket on top, laid a scarf beside it, and closed the wardrobe door so the mirror would return to being a rectangle of light instead of something I had to answer to. The phone lay face down on the table. I turned it over and watched the screen brighten. No new messages. I scrolled to Lila's voicemail, the one with the blinker and the number and the word oversight spoken with such casual authority, and let my thumb hover a moment above play. Then I set the phone in my bag and tied the straps together once tight. I put the peaches in the refrigerator. I rinsed the peppermint mug and left it upside down on the rack. I wiped the counter with a dishcloth and folded the cloth, carefully smoothing the corners with 2 fingers. There is dignity in the exactness of small tasks. There is also strength. I reached for my keys and felt their weight like something you can trust. The house was itself again for a second, the green shutters, the stubborn latch on the screen door, the pencil lines on the molding that no one had thought to erase. The wind chime out front found a second note lower than the first, and the two held each other in the air between us long enough for a person to decide what to do next. I locked the door behind me. The morning air in the alley was metallic and new. I walked to the garage, opened the warped door, and chose the old sedan because it starts even when the weather is undecided. The engine coughed once and then steadied. I drove with the window cracked, the smell of wet leaves rising from the curbs as the neighborhood lifted its blinds one by one. Riverbank Wayne Avenue branch opened at 8. I stood by the door with 2 other customers and read the posted hours as if that could slow the heartbeat in my throat. Inside, the floor was polished to a quiet shine. Behind the counter, a woman with gray-streaked hair and an efficient posture adjusted her glasses and smiled. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Teresa Polk, branch manager. How can I help you today?" I said my name and asked to review 6 months of activity on my accounts, plus a list of every person authorized to view or act on them. Teresa's smile narrowed, not unkindly. She motioned toward her office, glass-walled and neat. In the chair opposite her desk, I folded my hands and felt the smoothness worn into my wedding band by time. She typed, paused, typed again. The kind of pause that has weight. "Ms. Halstead." Teresa said at last, "I'm seeing multiple information requests under a secondary authorization, your daughter Lila Halstead. It looks like a signed form came in 2 months ago." She turned her monitor slightly so I could see a scanned document. My name bled upward at the end of the signature, in a way my hand has never moved. "I didn't sign that," I said. I gave her my driver's license and set it beside the screen. My C curves down. It always has. Teresa didn't argue. She studied the 2 signatures, then picked up a pen and tapped the forged loop twice. "We'll remove all third-party access immediately and flag the prior request," she said. "I'll also print your statements and internal access logs. If you wish to proceed further, you can file a fraud report. I can connect you with our compliance unit. Please print everything I said. And I'd like to open a new savings account, separate number, no linked profiles, and transfer the balance." I slid a small notebook across the desk. "Also, I need to update the beneficiary on my policy, the Dayton Senior Community Fund. Here's their information." Teresa's fingers moved quickly now. A woman in a navy blazer brought me forms with yellow tabs where I should sign. I read each line. The paper smelled faintly of toner and something sweet, maybe hand lotion. When the clerk asked if I wanted online access, I nodded and set a new password long enough to feel like a sentence. I changed the 2 I use elsewhere while I still sat in the chair, let my fingers find the rhythm they learned when I first taught myself to type letters to employers who never answered. When the transfers were done, Teresa slid a stack of stapled pages across the desk. "This is everything you requested. The authorization form will be revoked before noon. I'm also including a contact in our compliance department, Mr. Agrawal, should you decide to file." "Thank you," I said. The words came out clear, the way you pronounce your name on the first day of school so the teacher gets it right. On my way out, I paused by the candy dish and took a peppermint for later. The wrapper crackled in my pocket like a small alert creature. The Montgomery County Records Office sits in a building that wants to look younger than it is, new glass old bones. I found the clerk division on the 3rd floor, past a hall of framed photographs of elected officials smiling like they'd just remembered a neighbor's birthday. Through the glass at the counter, I could see Marcus Ellery at a desk, under a fluorescent light that hummed. He wore a tie too narrow for his shoulders, and his hair had thinned at the crown in a way that made him look older than his 30-something years. When he saw me, he stood so fast his chair scraped. "Aunt Miriam," he said, forcing a grin into his face. "I didn't know you were—" "I'd like to check the status of filings related to Parcel 19-0473, 3111 Logan Street," I said. "Deed updates, guardianship, anything submitted or drafted within the last 90 days. Marcus's eyes flicked to the side, a reflex he'd had since he was little, and left chocolate fingerprints on the table and thought no one would notice. "We can't share drafts," he said. "Only recorded documents." "Then let's look at recorded," I said. And Marcus called me Miriam like everyone else. He went very still. The way people do when something inside them realizes the charade is quieter than the truth. He nodded, clicked his mouse, printed a page, then another. When he slid them to me, I saw my name in bold on a template for temporary guardianship and a deed transfer worksheet with half the fields empty, the way office work looks when the person expects to come back and fill it in after lunch. "Drafts," I said softly. He pressed his lips together. "Aunt Miriam, please. Lila said you were overwhelmed. She asked for help. She said you'd be safer with oversight. I was just trying to... I set my phone on the counter and tapped play. The recording of Lila's call filled the small space between us. Evan's voice discussing the kitchen as if it were a prize. Lila using the word oversight like a passcode. Marcus's name clear as glass. He shut his eyes. When he opened them, the effort of it made him look like his mother in the year she worked doubles at the diner and slept on Sundays. I shouldn't have touched it, he whispered. I told them I could format the packet, but the doctor's note, the evaluation, Lila said it was arranged. I didn't read it closely. She pushed. I pushed back once, and then I stopped. What exists now? I asked. What did you submit? Who else has a hand on it? Marcus swallowed. He told me about a PDF routed through an external email that arrived already signed by Dr. Welby Ames, the same name on the sticky note Lila had posted on my refrigerator. He told me he'd started a property transfer worksheet for internal prep, but hadn't filed it, that the plan was to pair the guardianship with a deed change that would move the house into a trust with Lila as managing guardian. He named 2 coworkers who had glanced at the draft and shrugged, told me that he set a tentative file number to hold a spot in the queue. I recorded every word. Not to threaten him with them, though the phone could do that, but to keep myself from smoothing details into something neater than reality. When he stopped talking, the fluorescent light hummed louder, or maybe the room had simply grown too quiet to ignore it. You'll print me copies of everything I said. Templates, email headers, the hold number. Then you'll pull the file from the queue and not put it back. If anyone asks you, tell the truth. He didn't argue. He printed. He logged into a system I could not see and made the keystrokes that move a thing from one folder to another and then to a place called suspend. He initialed 2 lines on a form and circled a date with a pen that left a throat-thick line of ink. When he handed the folder through the slot, his hand shook. I'm sorry, he said. I know, I said. Be finished with it. Outside, the sun had found its way through a seam in the clouds. It lit the courthouse steps in stripes. I sat on the second-to-last step and read through the pages. There is a kind of relief in seeing schemes typed and dated. It robs them of the lazy glamour people are tempted to give wrongdoing when they talk about it later. Most of it is just paperwork and a person deciding not to look directly at something sharp. I called the number Teresa had given me for compliance and filed the report. I asked whether they could note the forged authorization without freezing my own access. The man on the line said they could, and his voice had the steady cadence of someone who has said the same words many times in worse situations. When we finished, I thanked him the way you thank a bus driver who waits when he sees you running. Then I called Sloan Keene, an attorney I had met once at a community seminar on probate and forgotten papers. He answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was clipped, not unfriendly. Mr. Keene, I said, this is Miriam Halstead. I'd like to retain you regarding fraudulent guardianship attempts and proposed real property transfer without consent. I have recordings, bank logs, and internal templates from the clerk's office. There was a brief silence the respectful, kind lawyers use when they are deciding which drawer to open in their mind. Come by my office at 2, he said. Bring everything. We'll copy it while you're here. His office sits above an upholstery shop that smells of glue and fabric and patience. In the waiting room, a plant with glossy leaves leaned toward the light. Sloan wore a brown suit that made him look like a man who knows how to read footnotes. He took my folder and slid each sheet into a scanner, naming them aloud, as if that would keep them from escaping authorization form, internal access log, recorded voicemail, transcript, draft, guardianship template deed, worksheet, email header, suspend confirmation. He asked careful questions. Not the kind designed to trip you, but the sort that lay a line of chalk so the later steps fall where they should. When he was done, he stacked the copies, bound them with a thin clip, and placed them in my bag. Do you have identification, the original deed release policy statements, and a list of witnesses to recent events, he said. Yes. I set my zip pouch on the desk and opened it. The room smelled faintly of citrus cleaner. Outside, a bus sighed as it halted at the corner. Good, he said, and made a note on a yellow pad. He didn't write much. Some people think with their pen. He seemed to think before it moves. On the drive home, the light had shifted toward late afternoon. The maples along Logan Street flashed at the edges like fish turning under the surface of a pond. I parked by the alley, carried my bag to the back door, and let myself in. The house breathed around me. In the sink, a single spoon waited, rinsed and set to dry. On the refrigerator, the strawberry magnet held my note still neat at the corners. I placed the folder on the table and smoothed the top page with my palm. The papers lay quiet. The peppermint in my pocket had warmed to body temperature and softened its shape. I set it beside the folder and listened to the room until it was only a room again. I hung my cardigan on the chair and stood by the window as the light thinned. The day had been ordinary in the way that counts a counter, a form, a printer, a signature that stands up when you look at it. The kettle clicked when it finished. I poured water over a fresh tea bag and watched steam rise, then disappear, then rise again. The window glass held my reflection for a moment and then returned it to the dark outside, where the alley ran like a ribbon between houses that looked just like mine. I set the cup down and rested my hand on the table. The wood is scarred from years of hot pans and the elbows of homework nights. My fingerprints fit the grooves they made. The house kept still. I was ready. Late morning slid across the table like a quiet hand. The front door opened without a knock, Lila's habit since moving in, and closed on the same breath. Voices moved down the hall, the soft bustle of two people who believe the house rests around them like a glove. I set my cup in the sink and dried my hands. When the bell rang, it sounded ordinary, almost polite. I opened the door. Sloan Keene stood on the porch in his brown suit leather briefcase tucked close. Beside him were two officers in navy nameplates catching the light and a woman with a notary stamp in a zippered case. Sloan nodded once. Ms. Halstead. Behind me, Lila's steps quickened. "What is this?" she said, a tremor hidden under brightness. Evan appeared over her shoulder with a smile he uses for strangers who might sell him something. "Let's sit," I said, and led them to the dining room. Sloan placed his briefcase on the table and opened it with a click. He arranged papers with the neat attention of someone laying tools onto a sterile tray. "Ms. Halstead has retained me," he said evenly. "We're here regarding fraudulent guardianship attempts, a forged bank authorization, and a proposed real property transfer without consent." Evan laughed, the kind that asks a room to join in. "That's absurd," he said. "We're helping." "She's been—" Sloan lifted a page. "Internal access logs from Riverbank Wayne Avenue," he said. He turned the document so it faced Lila and Evan. "Multiple inquiries under a third-party authorization submitted 2 months ago. Here's the scan of the form." He slid a second page forward. "Ms. Halstead's signature on record and the signature on the form. Note the loop of the C." Lila didn't look at the letters. Her gaze landed on the officers, then darted to the notary. "Mom," she said, voice softening, "you asked me to handle statements. You said you were overwhelmed." I set my phone on the table and pressed play. The room filled with road hum, a turn signal. Lila's voice, I can't live with her hovering. "They'll write that she needs oversight. Marcus says the deed's simple. We attach guardianship language and file it." Evan's reply followed like a door closing. "With the house, we clear the cards and fix the kitchen." "Stop it," Lila said, lunging toward the phone. One officer stepped between us without raising his voice. Evan's face tightened, the smile dropping away as if cut loose. Sloan unfolded another sheet. "Draft guardianship template and deed transfer worksheet from the Montgomery County Records Office," he said. "Obtained today. The assigned hold number has since been suspended." He placed a final paper on the stack. "Independent cognitive evaluation conducted at 9 a.m. by Dr. Leon Haskett, board certified. Result. Ms. Halstead is fully oriented and competent to manage her affairs." Color drained from Lila's cheeks. "Marcus is lying," she said flatly. "He hates me. He always has." Mr. Ellery provided internal headers, his own statement, and the hold number he created, Sloan replied. "He has also reversed his actions and documented the reversal. If you believe he perjured himself, that is separate. This," he tapped the stack, "is this." Evan stood palms flat on the table. "You can't bring police into our home without cause." "It's my home," I said. The notary unzipped her case and laid out a small metal embosser. The officers remained still, their presence heavy as furniture. Lila's eyes brimmed and did not spill. "Mom, please," she said. "We were scared. Every week you misplaced things. You left the stove on." "I did not," I said. I kept my voice even, not for her, but for myself. Sloan gathered the pages into a single stack, squared the edges, and looked to the nearest officer. "Officers Barnes and Rivas have reviewed the materials," he said. "On Ms. Halstead's complaint, they are prepared to proceed." Officer Barnes turned to me. His chin had a small nick where a razor had lost patience. "Ms. Halstead," he said, "do you wish to pursue charges for forgery, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to deprive you of property?" Lila flinched. Evan's jaw worked, a muscle jumping like a trapped moth. The room waited. "Yes," I said. The cuffs were quiet metal. Lila's breath hitched when they closed around her wrists. She caught my eye and looked away as if the sight of my face were worse than the pressure of steel. Evan muttered something sharp toward the floor that no one acknowledged. The notary stamped 2 copies of the officer's inventory list paper, hissing under the seal. As they were led down the hall, Lila turned once. Her mouth opened with a word she did not choose. The door clicked behind them, ordinary as a hinge can manage. Silence has weight when it lands after noise. I stood at the end of the table and rested my fingertips on the wood. Sloan closed his briefcase, slid the latch, and left a card beside the peppermint I had set there earlier. "We'll coordinate with the bank and records office," he said. "I'll be in touch this afternoon." He nodded toward the kitchen. Would you like the officers to secure any documents now? I have them, I said. Thank you. They left with measured steps, murmuring in the hall a hush that respected walls. The house expanded slowly as if it had been holding its breath. On the refrigerator, the strawberry magnet still pinned out for errands where I'd left it. Outside, a siren rose and blurred into distance. I washed the cup. The water ran hot for longer than usual, then cooled. I dried the cup and set it in its place. The chair where Evan had liked to sit waited empty-angled toward the TV. Dust showed on the dark wood where the sun found it. In the living room, the pencil marks on the doorframe kept their soft ash color. I pressed my palm flat against the molding and felt the groove where the first line had bitten into paint years ago. The house kept still the way a creature rests when a hand is lifted from its back. I sat at the table with the folder closed and the peppermint unwrapped beside it. The wrapper lay open like a tiny translucent map. The air smelled faintly of sugar and old wood. Light moved an inch along the floor and stayed there steady as a held note. The peppermint on the table left a clean brightness on my tongue. I sat with the closed folder under my palm and listened to the small noises houses make when they remember they are only wood and air. Afternoon thinned into evening. Through the front window, the maples along Logan Street shook the last of the day from their leaves. The phone started first one call from an unknown number, then another. I let them ring. When I finally answered, it was Teresa Polk from Riverbank. Ms. Halstead, she said, her voice careful but warmer than morning. We've completed the revocation. Third-party access is removed and the internal note reflects your fraud report. Compliance has contacted our legal team to coordinate. If you need statements couriered, we can arrange it. Email is fine, I said. Thank you, Teresa. Your decisiveness today helped us move quickly, she said, then caught herself as if praise were a thing a bank should ration. We'll be in touch. After we hung up, a message buzzed in Sloan Keene confirming that the officer's report had been logged, that property filings connected to my parcel were on hold pending. Investigation that he would copy me on a notice to the records office first thing in the morning. The language was dry and precise. It made a kind of sense that sat well in my chest. Things would move now without me pushing them along every inch. I slept that night for several hours in a row, the kind of sleep that used to arrive after double shifts, heavy and uninterested in dreams. When I woke, the house was gray in the first light. The chair Evan preferred looked as if it had always been empty. By mid-morning, a neighbor knocked with a question about the sirens. I nodded. A misunderstanding, I said. It wasn't true, and it wasn't a lie. She left with a pie plate I'd been meaning to return for months and a hug I didn't ask for. A breeze moved through the hall like a polite guest. 2 days later, the Dayton Daily ran a piece on the second page, daughter-husband arrested in forgery fraud attempt involving elderly mother, County Review's clerk procedures. The photograph was an exterior shot of the records building glass-catching sky. Names were included. Marcus Ellery's cooperation was noted in a paragraph near the bottom, the ink equivalent of a wince. By that afternoon, people who had known me long enough to use my maiden name left foil-covered dishes on the porch. Church ladies carried casseroles in insulated bags, each with masking tape that said heat at 350. The mail piled thicker and more official. Sloan handled the weight of it. When he came by to have me sign something, he stood by the window and watched Logan Street go by. Quiet block, he said. It tries to be, I answered. In the days that followed, details arranged themselves like chairs after a meeting. Riverbank flagged every access that had routed through the false authorization and sent me printouts with columns that made a tidy ladder of dates. The records office notified Sloan that all drafts connected to my parcel number were quarantined for review. The officer with the nick on his chin, Barnes, called to say the prosecutor had filed and the trial date would be set after a preliminary hearing. His voice had the softness people use when they have stood in too many kitchens. Then the calls came that were not soft. Evan's employer, a regional tax firm in Kettering, announced a leave pending internal review of conduct unrelated to client accounts. The line traveled further than the statement intended. Clients talked. The firm updated its website and Evans's name vanished from the staff page with the clean efficiency of a backspace key. Lila's office reassigned her caseload and moved her to clerical until matters resolve. The words looked like a banister's smooth rail, polite sure saying, only what must be said to keep a person from falling. On a Wednesday, the county executive held a short press conference, 5 microphones on a wobbly stand, a row of faces behind him that had spent too long under fluorescent light. They would audit intake protections, he said, and tighten signatory verification at the records office. Reporters' questions tapped against his answers like small birds against glass. The clip made the evening news, then the weekend roundup. In church the next Sunday, people turned to look at me without turning their heads. I shook Helen's hand and she squeezed it, once wordless steady. Sloan met me again in his office and put a legal pad between us. Civil remedies, he said, and listed phrases I had only heard on television, injunctive relief, damages, fees. I signed where he slid the tabs and felt nothing particularly triumphant, only the cool presence of a thing in motion. At home, the hall smelled faintly of paper whenever the sun warmed the stack on my desk. I flipped through copies now and then. Bank logs recordings transcribed the physician's letter with Dr. Haskett's clean square signature. On the refrigerator, the strawberry magnet loosened its grip on "out for errands, back later." The corners curled then flattened when I pressed them. Some days I wore the garnet jacket to the mailbox and then back in as if it were a permission slip no one else needed to see. One evening, the phone vibrated against the table and showed restricted. I let it go to voicemail. Lila's voice arrived, patched together by static. Call me. Please. The words were pressed flat, not pleading so much as measuring. I deleted the message and then emptied the trash, surprised at the steadiness of my own hand. In mid-October, the first leaves gathered in the gutter. Teresa called to say the beneficiary change had been registered. Dayton's Senior Community Fund now appeared where Lila's name had been. "Would you like a confirmation letter?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "one for my records." I placed it in the zip pouch behind the birth certificate. Paper finds its friends. 2 weeks later, Sloan slid a settlement proposal across his desk. The house, he said, would be part of any resolution whether I wanted it to be or not. It sat in the center of everything the way a table does, in a small kitchen, nothing much and everything. I stared at the deed release I had framed years ago and taken down since the paperwork began. The frame leaned on the floor against the wall glass reflecting the ceiling fan. I turned the idea over in my mouth like a stone until the edges rounded. "List it," I said. He held my eyes a moment as if weighing the sentence. "All right." The sign went up on a Tuesday: "For sale, Charleston Realty." The letter stood in the grass like a polite foreigner. Neighbors stopped at the curb and inclined their heads as if reading a grave. A young couple with a stroller waved with the tentative joy of people who are practicing living. An older man asked about the foundation and the roof, and I told him when the chimney seam had last been patched and what paint we used in the kitchen's soft wheat, and how it looked better in morning light. Showings happened in small, careful flurries. I wiped counters, set out a vase with cut branches, stacked the mail in a drawer, and stood on the back steps, with a sweater, when the realtor came by with her ring of keys, and a smile trained not to apologize for intruding. I heard strangers in the rooms I had mopped and in the hallway where pencil lines measured a childhood. A toddler's laugh drifted from the bedroom once, and I felt something shift in my ribs, not painful, more like a shelf being cleared and dusted. An offer came within the week, then another. We accepted a clean one, no contingencies from the couple with the stroller. They wanted an inspection, but not a war. When the day came to sign, we sat around a rectangle of laminate at Charleston's office, while a closer named Mina flipped pages with a practiced hand and pointed with a capped pen. I initialed a dozen boxes and signed 3 times with my C, looping down the way it learned to when I was 19 and needed it to look like authority. The buyer's baby slept with her fist by her cheek. Afterwards, I walked back to Logan Street and stood on the sidewalk. The house looked the same, and not at all. The shutters would stick in winter for the next person. The latch on the screen door would resist. The sun would still find the dust on the arm of that chair at 4 in the afternoon. I understood suddenly and entirely that it had never been a jewel to be fought over. It was a container. It had contained us as we were. It would contain someone else. I unlocked the door and stepped into the quiet as if I were walking into an old photograph. The closing check settled with the lawyers and then with the bank. I kept what Sloan advised, and I wrote a number on the memo line of a donation that would make the Dayton Senior Community Fund lean forward in their seats. When I handed the envelope to a woman at the front desk named Marlene, she looked at the amount and swallowed. "Ms. Halstead," she said, and stopped as if the sentence had too many directions to choose from. "It will do more work there than nailed to a kitchen," I said. She nodded and folded the letter as if it might break. Moving day arrived on a wind that smelled of cold pennies. 2 men came with a truck that advertised "careful" in letters larger than any of them. They lifted the cedar chest and the table and the wardrobe mirror that softens a face, and they were kind to everything. I left 3 things behind on purpose: the strawberry magnet, the curtain tiebacks Lila had bought, and the small chip in the phone case I had turned over with my thumb. The buyers would never know what those belonged to. They would call them quirks, and the house would not correct them. My new apartment faced east and looked over a rectangle of shared garden. The building was a senior community, but did not try to shout it. The hall smelled faintly of lemon and line-dried cotton. In the first week, I learned the names of the people who walked early: Marie, with her fast laugh and sneakers that flashed white; Nora, who used to teach English and still corrected punctuation under her breath; Mr. Franklin, who grew tomatoes with the patience of a person who has nothing to prove to a seed. I hung the garnet jacket in the back of the new wardrobe set, the cedar chest at the foot of a bed, narrower than the old one, and taped a small piece of paper inside the closet where only I would see it. Logan Street, thank you. Days found a shape. I tried the painting class on Wednesdays and made a small lake with more sky than water. The instructor, a man whose mustache demanded respect, told me the clouds were honest. I laughed, surprised at my own voice. I walked with Marie after breakfast and she told stories about the plant where she had worked in plastics, how everything there had wanted to be harder than it needed to be. On Tuesdays, I volunteered at the Senior Community Fund stuffing envelopes, answering calls from people who did not say what they meant at first. A receptionist clipped a name tag to my sweater by mistake one afternoon, and I left it there all day because no one seemed to mind who I was if I was keeping the phones from ringing too long. A month passed, then 2. The trial dates arranged themselves like weather announced, delayed, rescheduled. Sloan sent updates and emails that began with "peer our discussion" and ended with "regards." I read each one, put my responses in plain words, and made tea. In December, a letter slid under my apartment door, my name written in Lila's careful hand. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume, the one with citrus that never quite sat down. "Mom," it began. The sentences walked in a straight line. She wrote about therapists and paperwork and how silence feels different when you choose it than when it's given to you. She wrote, "I'm sorry without decoration. She did not ask for anything." At the bottom, her name looked like it did when she was 15 and had wanted a dance, and we practiced signatures on junk mail for an hour at the table. I folded the letter with the edges aligned and slid it into the coil-bound ledger under the red ribbon. I stood at the window for a long time. Outside, the garden beds were trimmed low. Mr. Franklin had wrapped the rose canes with burlap and twine. They looked like careful gifts. Winter settled and then blew itself out. In February, I painted a picture of the alley behind Logan Street from memory recycling bins. A single-ear cat light falling from a second-story window like a square of silk. The painting sold at the community fair for enough to buy a week of groceries and a spool of thread. I pinned the ribbon they gave me inside the wardrobe door next to the thank you note no one else would read. On a Thursday that smelled of thaw, Marie brought over a bottle of wine with a label that looked like a mistake. "Too sweet," she said, but it was on sale. Nora came with a lemon tart. Mr. Franklin knocked offered tomatoes from the last jar he'd put up in August. We sat at my small table and scooped tart from its tin and talked about nothing heavy and a few things that were. Someone put on music from a radio that could only find one station, and the song did not care if it was the one we wanted. We raised our glasses to mark the moment, not to name it. When they left the apartment, held the warmth of their bodies for a while and then tucked it away. I washed the glasses and set them upside down on a towel. The world outside the window went dark, then softer. Then the kind of blue that comes just before streetlights resigned themselves to being necessary. I sat and wrote a line in the ledger. "Dinner with MNF laughed." The pencil made a mild sound against the paper. I opened the cedar chest and ran my hand over the top of the documents until they lay flat. I returned the letter to its place under the ribbon. I closed the lid and felt the weight of it settle like a well-made door on its hinges. At the window, I watched the first star show itself without bragging. The garden path below held its shape even in dimness. I could see where it turned at the hydrangea and where it met the bench. I stood a long time with my fingers on the glass, not thinking of the house on Logan Street, or the kitchen cupboards, or the way the screen door had always stuck, or even the peppermint, just standing. Behind me, the kettle clicked. Steam lifted. The room breathed. I turned, poured, and carried my cup to the table where the small lamp found its circle. The paper in the ledger caught the light and gave it back. I set the cup down. The quiet did what it does when it is clean it held. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.